Buckingham Palace has now issued a message that is both direct and impossible to misinterpret regarding Archie and Lilibet. For years, the quiet surrounding the youngest members of the Sussex family has fueled assumptions, rumors, and dramatic tales that traveled faster than any verified facts. Questions about skipped events, withheld records, and unconventional choices have continued to captivate the public's curiosity. But what will finally bring this long-standing silence to a close, and what prompted the palace to choose this exact moment to speak up? Share your thoughts by commenting with a 1 if you relate to this situation, or a 0 if you see it differently. Be sure to like and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss what's coming next as we uncover every hidden royal secret. As the first light of a bitter winter morning stretched across the sky, a quiet update on the palace's official website sent shockwaves through the United Kingdom and even across the Atlantic. There was no press briefing, no royal sighting, no dramatic presentation. Instead, a single understated line tucked beneath December's chill was enough to spark widespread disbelief. Buckingham Palace had finally spoken plainly and decisively about Archie and Lilibet. For years, the quiet surrounding the youngest Sussex children had grown into ideal fuel for assumptions, rumors, and dramatic stories that traveled faster than any confirmed fact. Murmurs circulated about skipped milestones, allegedly withheld papers, unclear information, and unconventional choices. Some argued that something lay hidden beneath layers of royal custom, while others believed the palace was simply maintaining privacy. And then there were the conspiracy channels, the gossip threads, the relentless voices pulling two very young children into a public spotlight they were far too small to defend themselves against. But this morning felt different, almost like a scene from a film. Frost clung to the towers of Buckingham Palace, the gardens glimmered under a thin veil of dew, and the first faint streaks of winter sunlight struck the gilded gates. At the exact moment the update reached royal correspondents, digital commentators, and early morning broadcasters prepping their live reports. In an instant, phones rang through news offices. Editors sat up in shock, and producers rushed to overhaul their rundowns. Because for the first time, the palace had decided to address the speculation head-on. The precision of the phrasing, the deliberate pacing of each sentence, and the unmistakably assertive tone signaled something far more consequential than a routine notice. It marked a turning point in how the monarchy plans to navigate an age shaped by digital distortion, especially when children are pulled into it without any choice of their own. And beneath the statement's composed wording sat a quiet strain of tension shaped by William and Catherine's private worries, Princess Anne's instinctive vigilance, and the cooler, more calculated approach of Queen Camilla, whose presence in this moment would soon be impossible to overlook. To understand why this long-awaited update jolted audiences around the world, we have to look back at the origins of the subtle storm that had surrounded Archie and Lilibet long before most people even noticed it was forming. Long before that icy winter morning, when the palace finally ended its silence, the roots of tension had already settled quietly across the royal landscape. The story didn't start with a website notice or a line tucked into an official statement. It began with an absence, a lingering quiet shaped by years of unanswered curiosities, occasional sightings, evolving traditions, and an online world eager to fill every blank space with its own imagined tales. When Archie was born, many expected the familiar scene: the hospital steps, the cameras, the iconic doorway, and the smiling royal parents. Instead, the Sussexes opted for privacy. The palace confirmed the birth, but the usual layers of tradition surrounding a royal infant were replaced with a much more controlled presentation. Months later, when Lilibet arrived across the ocean, the pattern returned. A brief announcement, a simple note of congratulations, then quiet. For a monarchy built on ceremony, predictability, and public milestones, this adjusted rhythm created an empty space, not sinister, not secretive, just different. But in an era where online commentary never pauses, anything different is quickly treated as suspicious. Every absence became an opening. Every omitted detail became fertile ground for fresh theories. Photographs were examined frame by frame, the lighting analyzed, timelines questioned, and gestures endlessly interpreted. Online communities, especially those drawn to intrigue, constructed entire stories out of shadows. Within the palace, senior members watched the storm build, yet opinions sharply diverged on how to address it. Charles, weighed down by the responsibilities of the crown and the demands of winter duties, favored a measured, cautious approach. His instinct had always been to safeguard dignity through silence. William, however, keenly aware of the rapid pace of the digital world, recognized the growing risk early on. He reviewed intelligence from online monitoring teams, observed misinformation spreading quickly within influential circles, and knew that once public opinion solidifies, it rarely softens. Catherine experienced the dilemma on a deeply personal level. She had always felt that children, regardless of status, deserve shielding from public scrutiny. Seeing two toddlers barely able to comprehend the world become targets for speculation troubled her profoundly. The idea that Archie and Lilibet might one day see their names entangled in such discussions left her uneasy both as a mother and as a future queen. Anne, direct and resolute, warned that leaving the silence unbroken would let others control the story in increasingly damaging ways. She reminded Charles that the monarchy endures not just through discretion, but also through well-timed transparency. Camilla, practical, strategic, and cautious of controversy, questioned whether speaking out would fuel the frenzy or calm it. This clash of approaches created a quiet, yet tangible stalemate within the palace. The palace waited, hoping the chatter would die down on its own, but it didn't. It morphed, it multiplied. It gained a momentum of its own, and as December arrived with biting winds and a restless public, the royal family recognized that silence was no longer an option. It had turned into a liability. The shift came gradually, almost imperceptibly at first, like a cold draft sneaking through a closed door. No single moment changed the atmosphere inside the monarchy. Rather, it was the buildup of countless small warning signs that revealed just how far the rumor machine had spun beyond control. By December, the palace was no longer dealing with casual rumors. It was facing a narrative strong enough to warp public perception. The first alert reached William during a briefing from the digital monitoring team. What had begun as background chatter had escalated into a multi-platform cycle packed with claims edits and sensationalized deep dives into Archie and Lilibet's early years. Anonymous accounts were producing investigative-style videos, stitching together unrelated photos, mixing in comments from obscure blogs, and twisting timelines as if revealing some hidden truth. Each video drew thousands of comments, and more concerning many viewers genuinely believed something was being hidden. William went through the analysis carefully. The surge in attention worried him more than the rumors themselves. The report showed that much of the engagement came from older audiences, those who felt the monarchy had become overly secretive, especially about the Sussex children. People accustomed to an image of royal openness were now unsettled by modern boundaries they didn't yet fully grasp. The lack of familiar rituals, the public christening, the hospital steps, or the usual childhood appearances left many people susceptible to stories built entirely from shadows. The second alert came on a quiet evening at Windsor. Catherine was reviewing plans for an upcoming charity event when a staff member handed her a stack of press briefings. Normally, these summaries contained routine speculation and everyday commentary, but this time the tone was noticeably different. Several newspapers had subtly noted the growing public confusion regarding the royal status of the two children. They referenced opinion columns, editorials, and viral posts, questioning why the monarchy had never offered a clear explanation. Catherine read each passage with mounting concern. She knew precisely how misinformation takes hold. Once it settles, it flourishes in the soil of doubt. Her mind kept returning to the core problem: two innocent children untouched by palace politics or the weight of tradition were becoming the focus of distorted interpretations. Setting the papers aside, she realized the issue had grown far beyond mere gossip. It had become a matter of responsibility. Anne served as the third warning. She had tracked the rumors with the keen, unwavering scrutiny that had defined her entire public service. Anne understood better than most how the monarchy suffers when silence lets falsehoods spread unchecked. One afternoon, she met Charles privately in his study. Outside, the winter wind rattled the old windows while the fire crackled softly. Anne, never one for dramatics, placed a printout of a particularly viral post before him. "This has gone too far," she said plainly. Charles, drained from endless strategy meetings, looked down at the page. The post suggested, without proof, without reason, that the palace was concealing something simply because it hadn't shared every detail publicly. The tone wasn't spiteful, it was paranoid. And Anne knew better than anyone paranoia spreads faster than fact. "They're talking about the children as if they're abstract ideas," she continued, her voice steady, "not as real people." Charles remained silent. He stared at the photo, realizing that the palace's quiet had unintentionally created fertile ground for disorder to take root. Anne leaned back, letting her words hang, confident they would resonate eventually. But the most urgent warning came from an unexpected source. A private internal report, never intended for public view, outlined how the rumors were starting to affect royal staff during public events. While greeting visitors, several aides overheard questions that revealed just how deeply misinformation had spread. People asked whether the children would ever appear with the rest of the family, whether they were in the line of succession, or even if the monarchy formally recognized them. This was no longer a fringe discussion. It had become part of everyday conversation. When William read the report, a low, persistent unease settled in his chest. For years, he had worked to modernize the monarchy's digital presence, fully aware of how quickly misinformation could undermine public trust. The thought that Archie and Lilibet children whose parents had chosen privacy were being cast as symbols of suspicion troubled him deeply. That evening, he spoke with Catherine. They sat beneath the gentle glow of a lamp as the winter wind whispered against the windows. Catherine listened as William read the most troubling passages aloud, and a familiar sadness stirred within her. She thought of George Charlotte Lewis and the burden of raising children under constant scrutiny. She thought of the injustice of it all, watching Archie and Lilibet caught in a storm they never caused. "This can't go on," she whispered. "It won't," William answered. And with that, the first steps toward a palace-level response, the first in many years, quietly began to take shape. Inside Buckingham Palace, the tension had grown so palpable that even the longest-serving staff could feel it underfoot. Winter had taken full hold of London. The sky loomed heavy and gray, and the cold seeped through the stone halls like a warning. But the sharper chill came from the near-constant closed-door meetings. The rumors about Archie and Lilibet, once dismissed as online chatter, had evolved into a matter no one could overlook. The tipping point arrived one morning when a senior communications aide entered Charles's private study carrying a thick folder. She set it down more forcefully than intended. Fatigue weighed on her shoulders. "These are the latest briefs," she said. "They're louder now, and some are even quoting us or claiming to." Winter sunlight stretched long shadows across Charles's face, lending him an older, wearier look. He opened the folder fully aware of what he would find, yet still hoping against reason for something different, but there was nothing. Several headlines suggested that the palace's silence was tantamount to complicity, feeding speculation that something was amiss. Even more troubling, foreign media suggested the royal family avoided referencing the Sussex children due to unresolved uncertainties. Charles closed the folder deliberately. His quiet spoke volumes to the aide. Meanwhile, in another wing of the palace, Camilla reviewed her own briefing. She sat upright, eyes narrowing, as her advisors explained that the rumors were no longer just spreading, they were mutating, taking on a life of their own. Some outlets insisted that Archie and Lilibet had never been seen in public. Others suggested the royal family was hiding a dispute over their titles. Camilla tapped her fingers against the armrest, the soft sound sharp in the quiet room. "Absurd," she said, her tone clipped. "The more attention we give this, the bigger it becomes. We cannot legitimize nonsense." Her advisors exchanged uneasy looks. Finally, one spoke up. "Your Majesty, these claims are now shaping public perception of the monarchy." Camilla exhaled a long, weary breath. "Blame the parents for choosing privacy. We should not have to explain what never needed explaining." Her words carried the sting of disappointment, and beneath it something sharper, a desire to safeguard the institution, certainly, but also a reluctance to re-enter the California chapter of the monarchy's public story. She never spoke it outright, but those around her had learned to read the meaning behind her tone. Across the estate, William paced the length of his office. He had just received the latest digital metrics showing the rumor cycle had sunk its roots into the older audience, the very demographic that upheld the monarchy's legitimacy. "It's not just damaging," he told his communications aide. "It makes us look weak, like we can't defend the truth about our own family." When Catherine approached, her calm presence contrasted sharply with his agitation. Speaking gently but firmly, she said, "We cannot leave the children unprotected." William knew she was right. If you find this story intriguing, don't forget to hit like, share, and subscribe to our channel so you won't miss what happens next in this royal saga. Catherine had always had a keen instinct for cutting through emotional turbulence and identifying the moral core of any situation. And this time, that core was the innocence of two young siblings living thousands of miles away. Anne was the final voice to join the discussion, her tone steady and unwavering, hardly faltering. After the scheduled press briefing, she caught up with Charles at the end of the corridor, holding a tablet displaying a screenshot of a post spreading at lightning speed. "They're discussing Archie and Lilibet as if they're fictional characters," she said. Anne said, "This is no longer harmless speculation. It's a blemish on the monarchy's credibility." Charles met her gaze, exhaustion etched deep in his eyes. "If we respond, we break precedent. If we don't respond," Anne countered, "we break trust." Silence filled the room. Charles knew she was right. Tradition was no longer a reliable shield in a world where misinformation spread faster than fact. And that was the moment the crisis meeting was convened, a closed-door session in a smaller room at Windsor, the kind of meeting where discretion mattered as much as the air itself. The long, oval table caught the warm glow of the overhead lights, while winter's chill left a thin mist on the window panes. William sat upright, Catherine beside him, composed but determined. Anne sat across, arms folded. Camilla arrived last, easing into a chair with a mix of irritation and caution. Charles drew a deep breath. "We are facing a problem," he said. "Not misconduct, but a misunderstanding that has taken on a life of its own." Catherine leaned in. "Then let's address that misunderstanding together." Camilla's eyes flicked toward her, cool and appraising. "We can't respond to every online rumor. That only makes us appear weak." William's reply was immediate. "This isn't about entertaining rumors. It's about safeguarding the truth about children and protecting the Crown's integrity." Anne nodded. "If the public thinks we're hiding something, that belief becomes its own version of reality." The debate surged back and forth, sharp and unyielding. Tradition versus modernity. Silence versus transparency. Preservation versus adaptation. Camilla urged caution. William pushed for action. Anne advocated decisiveness. Catherine spoke quietly, yet with unmistakable authority about shielding the youngest family members no matter where they lived. At last, Charles lifted his hand and the room fell silent. "Prepare a statement," he said, "a clear one." With those words, the course was decided. "Before we move on, I'd love to know where you're joining from, your city, your state, your country. Every viewpoint adds something valuable to discussions like this." The statement was set to go live just after nightfall, its timing carefully coordinated to coincide with late-night news in London and late-afternoon coverage in the United States. It was a deliberate choice, signaling that the palace fully recognized the global reach of the conversation. Yet even with precise timing and carefully honed language, no one within the royal family could have anticipated the magnitude of the response that followed. When the alert appeared on the monarchy's official channels, it was simple and measured, yet unmistakably firm. The announcement confirmed that Archie and Lilibet were fully recognized members of the royal family, clarified their place in the household, and gently reminded the public that children deserve protection from speculation. There was no emotional appeal, no defensiveness. Instead, it was firm, a clear line drawn across the frost-laden ground of early December. Within minutes, television networks interrupted regular programming. Anchors, already alerted that something important was imminent, immediately adjusted their tone. Cameras cut to royal correspondence framed against the dark outline of Buckingham Palace. Streetlights glimmered through the winter haze. Microphones lifted, cameras rolled, and responses started flooding in. Some commentators said the statement was long overdue. Others viewed it as the monarchy's first meaningful effort to confront persistent digital negativity. But the most revealing reactions came from ordinary viewers, particularly older audiences, people who had often unknowingly absorbed the very rumors the palace was now dismantling. Many had believed the online chatter because the palace's silence felt like quiet confirmation. Now, with a single statement, their doubts shifted into something calmer and more grounded. But in the digital sphere, the response took a completely different path, fast, loud, and explosive. The moment the statement appeared, conspiracy channels immediately reframed it, claiming it as proof of yet another cover-up. That reaction was expected. What the palace hadn't anticipated was the public's overwhelming pushback. Social media erupted with posts praising the royal family for finally taking action. Comment sections, usually chaotic, shifted into unusually measured conversations, and for the first time in months, the rhythm of misinformation began to falter. But not everyone in the palace experienced the moment the same way. Camilla, seated by the fireplace in her private drawing room at Clarence's house, received the final draft just minutes before it went public. She read each line, deliberately absorbing the tone, the warmth, and the careful wording regarding the children. The statement was softer than she had expected, emphasizing family unity rather than institutional formality. She closed the document with a quiet, weary sigh. "This will only encourage them," she murmured to her senior aide, referring to Harry and Meghan. The aide hesitated, unsure whether to respond or stay silent. Camilla wasn't angry, but she felt sidelined. Her instinct to maintain distance had been overtaken by a younger generation strongly supported by Anne. Meanwhile, at Windsor, William's reaction was completely different. Arms crossed, jaw tight, he watched the announcement play across the small office screen. It was the right fight to take on, even if it meant guiding tradition into unfamiliar territory. As for Charles, he received the public's response with a mix of pride fatigue and a quiet sense of relief. He knew that kings rarely get to pick their storms. They only choose how to endure them. And tonight, for the first time in this long, heavy drama, he felt they had faced the storm not as divided individuals tied to private loyalties, but as a family entrusted with protecting something greater than themselves. That night, as winter clouds drifted slowly across London's sky, the monarchy stood at the threshold of a new chapter, one defined not by secrecy or silence, but by the determination to protect its youngest members from the shadows of the digital age. In the hours after the palace's announcement, the atmosphere surrounding the monarchy shifted in ways both subtle and striking. What began as a simple clarification about two children quickly grew into a wider conversation about truth, responsibility, and the limits of royal silence in a world where whispers spread faster than facts. Across Britain, morning papers arrived on doorsteps with bold headlines signaling a turning point. Some described it as an act of protection. Others called it a rare moment of transparency. Even commentators usually critical of the monarchy acknowledged that the message resonated not for its drama, but for its decisiveness. It was the clarity many hadn't realized they were waiting for. In California, Harry and Meghan read the statement, their emotions complex and difficult to put into words. It wasn't an apology nor a warm embrace. It didn't erase the past, nor could it untangle the complicated layers surrounding their exit. But it achieved something deeply significant for them. It reaffirmed their children's place within the royal narrative. Meghan, always attuned to stories that twist motherhood, felt a flicker of vindication. Harry recognized in the palace's tone the very principle he had championed for years: children deserve protection from battles they never chose. Catherine absorbed the emotional weight quietly. She knew all too well what it meant to raise children under constant public scrutiny. Watching Archie and Lilibet pulled into conspiracy narratives had sparked a fierce maternal instinct in her. Seeing the palace finally take action, she sensed a rare alignment of moral purpose, an instance where the institution's choices matched her instincts as a mother. Anne, with her characteristic bluntness, told her aides the reaction was clear, necessary, and long overdue. To her, this was a corrective step, not a concession. Yet even as the announcement eased the immediate uproar, it sparked deeper questions. How would the royal family navigate privacy, transparency, and the lives of royal children growing up in a digital age that rarely allows mystery? After this rare moment of clarity from the palace, the world was left reflecting on something far bigger than titles, timelines, or lineage. What began as a storm of rumors about Archie and Lilibet had become a lesson few expected from a centuries-old institution. A lesson in how quickly stories take hold when silence leaves a vacuum, and how easily children become collateral in conflicts they never chose. Looking at the full picture, it was impossible not to see how profoundly the digital age has reshaped our understanding of truth. The lack of public appearances had become a stage for outsiders to weave one theory after another. A few altered photos were suddenly treated as proof of an elaborate cover-up no one had ever imagined. Silence, whether chosen out of respect or strategy, became a blank canvas for others to project their own conclusions. Throughout this unfolding drama, two very young children were cast as symbols of stories they never created. In my view, this moment highlights a tension familiar to anyone living in an age where information travels faster than comprehension. People are naturally inclined to fill in the gaps. When something seems out of place, when a detail feels unusual, when a tradition changes without explanation, our minds instinctively search for meaning even if we have to create it. For many, that impulse isn't harmful. It comes from curiosity habit or years of observing royal rituals shift unexpectedly. But good intentions do little to shield anyone, especially children, from the harm caused by unchecked speculation. What stands out most in this story is the leadership of the senior royals who advocated for transparency. William, long aware of how quickly misinformation can undermine public trust, recognized the danger of letting imagination outrun reality. Catherine, who sees motherhood as a responsibility that extends beyond her own children, viewed the situation as a moral boundary quietly crossed. Anne, ever blunt and observant, reminded the family that silence is not always dignity. Sometimes it's neglect disguised as tradition. Even Charles, loyal to the old habits of restraint, admitted that some storms do not fade simply because the palace refuses to acknowledge them. And in that acknowledgement, he revealed something modern audiences often overlook. Leadership isn't rigidity, it's adaptation. The monarchy's choice to speak out wasn't aggressive, nor was it defensive. It wasn't about taking sides between California and London. At its heart, it was an effort to protect two children from narratives they might one day encounter without ever knowing where those stories began. That alone gives us reason to pause. As viewers, we are reminded that the loudest voices aren't always the most accurate, and the most sensational claims aren't always the most important. In a world flooded with commentary, true wisdom sometimes comes from stepping back and asking whether a story respects the humanity of those involved, especially the youngest among them. And perhaps that is the central lesson here. Children deserve the space to grow without becoming characters in someone else's conspiracy. They deserve care, protection from the pressures of public opinion, and shielding from imagined stories spun by strangers who will never truly know them. As winter slowly blankets the United Kingdom, the palace's message continues to resonate far beyond the marble halls. It reminds us that truth, when delivered quietly, yet clearly, can cut through the densest fog of rumors. And as the next chapter of the royal family begins to unfold, one point becomes increasingly clear. The most lasting legacy any institution can leave is not in crowns, titles, or ceremonies, but in how it chooses to safeguard those too young to protect themselves. Drop a comment with the number 1 if you agree with this message, or 0 if your opinion differs. If you found this story meaningful, be sure to like, share, and subscribe to the channel so you won't miss upcoming videos. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you in the next videos.